You're listening to The Hour of the Time, and I'm Pooh.
And I'm Doyle.
And I'm William Cooper.
Allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, across the nation and around the world. You're listening once again to The Hour of the Time. And what an hour this is going to be, followed by another hour. How about that? Our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is Michael Cremo. And I'm not sure if you pronounce that Cremo or Cremo. We'll find out in just a few minutes. He's a truth and science advocate. He's a long-time, ardent critic, and I might add very a real critic of how scientists have abused their position and power. Michael Cremo is a member of the History of Science Society, the American Anthropological Association, and a research associate with the Bhaktivedanta Institute, specializing in the history and philosophy of science. His persistent investigation during the 8 years of writing the internationally acclaimed book, Forbidden Archaeology, has documented a major scientific screw-up, in my estimation. He is an international authority on archaeological anomalies. He is considered a leading authority on anomalous archaeological evidence relating to the antiquity of the human race. And I think you're going to be very surprised with some of the things he's going to reveal to you that the establishment of archaeologists have been hiding from the people of the world. He has a reputation for exposing major scientific cover-ups in the field of archaeology. Michael Cremo has enlivened audiences around the world on this fascinating subject as the author of the highly controversial book, Forbidden Archaeology, and several other volumes one of which is along exactly the same lines. He is an internationally sought-after speaker and media guest. Most recently, he was a featured guest on the controversial national broadcast of Communists primetime special hosted by Charlton Heston entitled The Mysterious Origins of Man. Michael Cremo, welcome to the Hour of the Time.
Thank you, Bill.
Would you like to start off and just sort of give our listening audience your standard introduction into what it is that you've been doing and why it's so important?
Yes. If you were to look at archaeology as a big museum, what you'd find is that the public is only let into one small room of that museum, and on display there you'd see only the artifacts and skeletons, the stones and bones that go along with the orthodox scientific idea today, which is that human beings like ourselves have only been around for about 100,000 years or so, and before that there would have been only more ape-like creatures, ape men of various kinds, and before that apes and monkeys. But what most people don't realize is there are other rooms to that Museum of Archaeology, other rooms with locks on the doors. So what I've tried to do in my work is to take the locks off of those doors and those hidden rooms in the big Museum of Archaeology and let people in to see what's there. And what you find that over the past 150 years or so, scientists have found abundant evidence, massive amounts of evidence, showing that human beings like ourselves have been on this planet for literally millions of years, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of years. And of course, this blows out of the water most of the theories that have been presented to us over the past 100 years or so. The Darwinian theory of evolution in particular, it completely contradicts that theory, because we find that there isn't any evidence that human beings evolved from apes or ape men. Rather, it appears we've coexisted with these creatures for vast periods of time on this planet. So, of course, people will ask, well, why, if so much of this evidence is there, why don't we hear about it? And that's because it's been suppressed by what I call a process of knowledge filtration. If you have these facts that go against the established theories, then people just don't hear about them. And I hope we'll get a chance to talk about a lot of these cases this evening with your audience.
Oh, well, I certainly am looking forward to it, Michael. I heard you on the Art Bell broadcast one night a few weeks ago, and I was absolutely appalled that the only interest Art Bell had was in trying to somehow coerce you into saying that all of this stuff means that we had been visited by some alien species from some other planet, and you were not able to do that. And so tonight we're going to give you all the time that you want to talk about all of these things, and I am extremely interested in what you have to say. Whatever in the world got you interested in this? Because I never would have thought to question a scientific venue like archaeology. I would never believe that archaeologists would be hiding things from us.
Well, that's a very good question, Bill. And I think you're right. Most people, they wouldn't have any reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Now you mentioned in the introduction that I'm a member of the Bhakti Vedanta Institute, and that's the science studies branch of a Hindu-based organization called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And my involvement with that organization led me about 25 years ago to begin some very intense study of the ancient writings of various civilizations, in particular the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. And among those writings, I found a very interesting group called the Puranas, or the histories. And these Puranas, they talked about the existence of human civilizations on this planet going back into the very, very dimmest regions of time, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years into the past. And I began to notice that the writings of other ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Mayan and Incan civilizations in the New World, they all seem to give a vastly longer period of time to human history than does modern science. So I thought, well, if there's such an agreement among all of these different wisdom traditions in the world that human beings do have a vastly longer period of history than modern science has, then perhaps there might be some physical evidence to back up what these ancient sources were saying. Now, I had been aware of one or two interesting little anomalies that I had encountered in my studies of the history of archaeology, and I thought, well, perhaps if I spend a few more weeks digging into this, I might be able to turn up a few more examples, and maybe I'd write a little pamphlet or a small book about it and go on to something else. But when I started looking into things, when I started looking into the entire history of archaeology over the past 150 years or so, I was really quite shocked to find that these archaeologists have literally buried almost as much evidence as they've taken out of the ground. In other words, they've discovered massive amounts of evidence showing that human beings have been present on Earth for millions of years, just as these ancient sources had said. So that's what really got me into it. If I hadn't been involved in some of these studies of ancient writings of different civilizations, particularly the ancient writings of India, I probably wouldn't have thought to question the ideas that I had been taught in school. What most people are taught in school today, most of what you see presented in these science specials on television like Nova and the National Geographic Science Specials, I wouldn't have thought to question the exhibits that you see in your local Museum of Natural History. They always have these very interesting little displays of the very little monkey that grows up and becomes the little ape man, and then finally you get the human being like ourselves. I wouldn't have thought to question any of that, perhaps, without having taken the time to look at things from a different perspective.
The only thing that ever caused me to wonder, and I didn't wonder very long really, was in my own research in the ancient culture of the Egyptians. I discovered that the Egyptians have never claimed to have built the Sphinx. Instead, you read that it was always there. And they were always preserving it and repainting it and taking care of it, but they had no idea who had built the Sphinx. And that made me stop and wonder. And of course, I had read some of the Vedas and some of the Indian texts, and they talked about ancient civilizations that had a pretty advanced technology from what I could gather. But you could also attribute those kinds of things, if you wanted to, and I chose to religious myths. And so I didn't pursue any of that. And apparently, not only have you pursued it, but you've pried the lid off of sort of a Pandora's box, if I'm not mistaken.
As I said, I just thought that this little bit of research that I was going to do was just going to take a few weeks. And it really, when I began to find out the vast quantities of evidence that had been suppressed, it just was one thing was just leading to another, and it was just taking 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and I wasn't getting to the bottom of it, 5 years, 6 years. It took me 8 years until I figured out, well, basically I had pretty much found most of the major skeletons that were in the closet there. Now, I think there's a lot more, and as time goes on, I find that people are writing to me, they're cluing me into other discoveries, but I thought I had the basic lay of the land after about 8 years. But I tell you, it really did make me, I have to confess, it made me a little bit angry as I started to find out more and more about this. I just could not believe the audacity of the mainstream scientific community that they could be sitting on so much information that contradicted what they had been telling the public. It really made me a little bit angry, I have to confess.
Well, it makes me angry too, and extremely curious. What was the first major discovery that you made when you began to dig into this that you can honestly say actually contradicts and almost could be said to destroy the modern anthropological teachings? That, well, if I were to go to college today, which I'm not about to at my age, but if I were to go to college and study anthropology, I would get a completely different story from what the evidence that you turned up is telling us. What is the first major discovery that you made that would cause any reasonable person to say, wow, we've really been scammed here?
Well, the one case that I found really fascinating right in the beginning of my research, and which still fascinates me today, is the California gold mine discoveries. In the last century, there was a gold rush in California. Gold was discovered in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and people from all over the United States went to California to get the gold. And when I first went there, they were panning for gold in the streams, but later on, they began to dig tunnels into the sides of mountains through solid rock to get out the gold. And sometimes inside these tunnels, hundreds, perhaps even 1,000 or more feet inside these tunnels, in the solid rock, the miners were finding human skeletons, just like ours, not ape men, but skeletons of anatomically modern humans like ourselves.
Now, when you say solid rock, what are you talking about?
Well, they were digging these tunnels into the sides of mountains, which were composed of, at first, heavy layers of volcanic rock called basalt. Mm-hmm. And after digging through those, then you get into this very compact the gold-bearing deposits, which are old river deposits dating back 50 million years, where you had a mixture of sand and stone and flakes and nuggets of gold that had solidified into a very hard conglomerate rock. So that's the material that they were digging into. And these materials, as I said, they were covered over by hundreds of feet of solid basalt and volcanic rock. The discoveries were made in tunnels that were dug through this rock. In other words, it was an area where there were no fissures through which little objects could come down. Obviously, these weren't skeletons that were buried by Indians because, as I said, to get to these things, the miners had to dig through solid rock to get to the point where they found these objects and skeletons embedded in this rock. And according to the modern geological reports, the rock in which these skeletons and objects are found is about 50 million years old. Now that's really quite extraordinary because according to your orthodox scientific ideas, human beings like those skeletons there, human beings like ourselves didn't come into existence until about 100,000 years ago, and then only in Africa, according to the modern ideas.
Leaky, yeah.
And to have evidence for anatomically modern humans existing in California 50 million years ago, it is quite shocking from the standpoint of modern science. Now, from the standpoint of some of these ancient traditions and writings, it wouldn't be surprising at all because they'd expect to find evidence for human presence going back even further than that. But in terms of modern science, it's completely, totally out of the question. They would say that at that time, 50 million years ago, you wouldn't have had even your most primitive apes and monkeys existing at that time. So to have human beings existing at that time, that was really quite extraordinary. Now all of this evidence, it was collected by a Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the state geologist of California at the time, and he was a professional scientist, a geologist. He wrote a massive book about these discoveries, which was published by Harvard University in 1883. But the question is, well, why don't we hear about these discoveries today? You won't find them mentioned in the textbooks. You won't find the objects on display in the museums. You don't hear it talked about, by the scientists who appear on these television specials that you see on PBS, the History Channel, the Running Channel. You don't hear about it. And why is that? It's because of what I call this process of knowledge filtration. And the person who did the suppressing of this particular evidence was a scientist, a very influential scientist named Dr. William B. Holmes. He was working at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and he said about this Dr. Whitney out in California, he said, well, if this Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, then he wouldn't have announced his discoveries despite the imposing array of facts with which he was confronted. In other words, if the facts, even a great number of well-attested facts, goes against the particular theory of human origin that is held by the orthodox scientific community, then those facts have to be put aside, and the person that reports them has to be discredited. And that's exactly what happened. Those discoveries were suppressed. They were filtered out. And, though I had my own little personal experience with the knowledge filtration process connected with those California gold mine discoveries, because I think two things are important here. The very facts themselves and what they say is important, and the whole process by which they are suppressed and continue to be suppressed is also very interesting. That has to be documented. So I've always tried to document both things. The factual evidence itself and its extraordinary significance for our whole concept of human origins and antiquity, and also, and perhaps even more important, I find it more interesting and more fascinating and intriguing, is the process by which this evidence is filtered out, the process by which it's suppressed. And I had a very interesting experience with that myself. You mentioned earlier that my book, Forbidden Archaeology, had been featured in an NBC television special which aired in February 1996 called The Mysterious Origins of Man, hosted by Charles and Heston. I also appeared in that show. But when they were filming it, I told the producers they should go to the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Natural History at the University of California at Berkeley, because that is where these objects from the California gold mines are being kept. Now, when they got in touch with the museum official, they were told, well, you're working on a television program. You probably have a very tight deadline. We just wouldn't have the time to go and search for these objects and bring them up for you to film. So then the producers told them, well, no, we have 6 months. We have plenty of time. Let's just see the objects. And then the museum officials came up with another excuse. They said, well, we have a very tight budget. We would have to pay our workers overtime to have them go and bring these artifacts out, and we just can't afford to do it. The producers came back with an offer to pay all the overtime expenses for the workers, pay all the expenses, whatever's required. Finally, the museum officials just said, no, we're not going to let you see these objects. And I think it's pretty clear why they wouldn't let the television producers from NBC in to see those objects. It's very clear. They suspected that the evidence was going to be used publicly in a way that was detrimental to them, that opposed the theory that they have and that they're holding on to for dear life, because so much depends on it.
The future of socialism and the destruction of Christianity and other religions which insist upon a belief in God. All of these things are hanging on.
Well, yes, that's absolutely right, and this became very clear to me when the program actually aired on NBC in February of 1996. There was an explosion of outrage from what I would call the fundamentalist Darwinist element within the scientific community. I'm not going to say that every scientist is closed-minded and doctrinaire, but there is an element, a very influential element in there that I call the fundamentalist Darwinists, who are committed to their particular idea that the human beings have evolved from the apes fairly recently by some material process of evolution fairly recently in geological time. They're fixed on that idea more for political and ideological reasons than for genuine scientific reasons. So they exploded in outrage when this television program was aired on NBC. It was sort of like an intellectual Pearl Harbor for them, a surprise attack. They hadn't expected it. They thought they had in particular the mainstream media under their control. Now talk radio and the shortwave radio and the internet is another thing. But they thought that at least they had the mainstream broadcast media pretty much under their control. So I think it was the first time in history that a major American television network had ever broadcast a program that directly challenged the Darwinian ideas of human evolution. It was quite a shock to them. And, people often ask me, well, why are they feeling like that? And I think it came out, one thing they did, it was very interesting. Dr. Allison Palmer, the head of the Cambrian Research Institute, one of these evolutionary research organizations in the academic world out there, he actually went to the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and tried to get them to fine NBC millions of dollars for having shown this television program. He also wanted the government, through the FCC, to force NBC to broadcast public apologies for having shown that program. Scientists of his type, they also attempted to organize boycotts of the sponsors. And the television program was actually so popular that NBC announced that it was going to show it again. And when that happened, these fundamentalist Darwinists within the scientific community, they actually became even more outraged, and they began a letter-writing campaign to the president of the General Electric Company, which owns the NBC network, and tried to get them to force NBC not to show this program again. So now, I'm happy to say that none of those efforts were successful, and that NBC did broadcast the program again, telling people, well, hey, everybody, look at the program the scientists don't want you to see. But sometimes people ask me, well, why were these efforts made? I mean, what possible reason could these scientists have for wanting this information suppressed? And after that television program was aired, these scientists were exchanging thousands of messages among each other on the internet in their scientific discussion groups on archaeology and anthropology and evolution. And as I was studying the traffic, as I was looking at these messages, I saw two reasons emerging why they were so concerned. One was control over the educational system in the United States. It's actually illegal in all 50 of the United States to teach anything other than their idea, this Darwinian idea of evolution, in the nation's tax-supported school. So that's a pretty good position to be in. If you've got the United States government saying nobody can teach anything other than your particular idea in the school system, I think that's an intellectual monopoly they would like to hang on to. Now, they do have an organization called the National Center for Science Education, and after this television program aired, the president of that organization said, well, the telephones at my headquarters were ringing off the hook because science teachers from high schools all over the country were calling and saying, help, our students are asking us questions we can't answer after they saw this information on the television. And I just have to ask, well, what is so sacred about this particular theory that no one should even be allowed to question it? You have to have the United States government coming in and saying nobody can teach any alternative idea in the nation's public schools. What is so sacred about this theory? Why are the museums hiding the information? Why won't they let them? Why do they try to punish and intimidate television networks for even showing this information to the American people? Control over the educational system is one reason. The second reason that I saw emerging as I studied all these internet messages was money. Pure, simple money. They were worried, well, if people started getting a lot of this information, then eventually it might filter down to their political representatives who might start cutting back on the millions and millions of dollars of research money that these scientists are getting to carry out their program of research. So those were the two things that seemed to be on the top of the list of why they were reacting in such an extreme way. Control over the educational system and their own research money. So now all of these things that I've talked about, I've documented in a book that's just come out. It's called Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. So if anybody wants to see the text of those letters to the FCC, trying to get them to fine NBC millions of dollars, if they want to see any of these internet messages about control over the educational system and research money, they're all there. It's all documented.
I have no doubt that all of that is absolutely true. I think there's another reason also. I think the movement toward world socialism and the hold that Marxism has over our university systems would crumble if this were acknowledged as debunking or doing away with or providing a serious setback to Darwinism.
Oh yes, I think you're absolutely right about that, and I think there are some very organized efforts to kind of keep these ideas intact for purposes of social control. And in my book Forbidden Archaeology, I mentioned, I gave a lengthy discussion of the discovery of the so-called missing link in China during the 1920s, the so-called Peking Man discoveries, which were taken as evidence confirming the Darwinian theory of evolution. You had some so-called ape man being discovered near Peking, so it's called Peking Man. It's still talked about in all the textbooks.
Didn't that turn out to be some kind of a hoax or something?
Well, I don't deny that ape men existed. I mean, that's one thing. I think that perhaps they're still with us today, but alongside them existed human beings like ourselves, so they can't be taken as evidence for evolution. When you look at everything that scientists have found, you find that, well, just as today we coexist with different kinds of apes and monkeys and perhaps some other kinds of creatures as well, so in the past we coexisted. So you don't get if you look at everything that they found, you don't get a picture of evolution, you get a picture of coexistence. Now, in these particular set of discoveries, the Rockefeller Foundation was involved in financing the excavations for this so-called missing link, which helped shore up Darwinian evolution. Now, the Rockefeller Foundation was also involved in funding all kinds of research in other areas. They were funding genetic DNA research. They were funding astronomy. They were funding medical research.
The Dead Sea Scrolls and a lot of other things.
Yes. Now, what they said is the president of the Rockefeller Foundation said at the time, during the 1920s and 30s, looking back at that era, he said, actually, it was all one program. Whether we were studying the stars in the sky or the earthworms, the sex mating habits of the earthworms, it was all one program. program designed for one purpose. They want to study human beings. They want to study, and of course, the study of organism as complex as a human being, well, maybe you have to start out with earthworms and things like that. But they said the whole goal of their whole program was to understand human nature with the goal of establishing beneficial control. It was very explicit.
Social engineering.
Control by whom? For the benefit of whom? I think we have to ask ourselves these questions. So these aren't just little these debates about the stones and bones and evolution, or not just some ivory tower academic debate. There are people with money behind this, with influence behind this, with power behind this, who have certain goals, and the explicit goal that was stated in the publications of the Rockefeller Foundation was, yes, we have to understand human nature with the idea of establishing beneficial control. Control by whom? For what purpose?
Wow.
We have our ideas about that.
This is incredible. We're going to give you about 2.5 minutes to take a little break, and you can go do whatever you want and be back in about exactly 2.5 minutes, and we'll get started again.
Okay, Bill, I'll be back.
Thank you, Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to The Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Doyle Shamley is here, and our special guest tonight is Mr. Michael Cremo. Is that the correct way to pronounce your name, Michael?
Yes, it is.
I wasn't sure, and I certainly don't want to mispronounce it. During all this time, I'm sure you found an awful lot of evidence of human life millions of years ago. In fact, I know you did, and much of it, as much as 50 million years, or even longer, or even a greater time back in the history of the Earth. But what else did you find? I'm sure that you must have found something other than just bones and teeth.
Sometimes you do find a few remnants that seem to suggest a little bit higher level of culture. Of course, I haven't come across any 747s or laptop computers down there, but it's actually very interesting. I was once on an internet discussion group, and I didn't raise this question. One of the scientists, one of the archaeologists said, well, what if there was a technologically advanced human civilization that existed 100 million years ago? What signs would we see in the earth? What would be left? And the archaeologists had a big discussion about it among themselves. I didn't participate. I just sat in the background and listened, lurked, as they say, in the discussion group. And here's what they came up with. They said, well, most of the metals would be gone because most metals oxidize. They corrode. The only metal that really doesn't corrode very easily is gold. Now, sometimes you do get some rare cases of preservation of other metals, but most of them corrode, and that's why gold is considered so valuable today, because it doesn't corrode. Now, another point that they made was anything organic, of course, plastic, wood, paper, all of that would be gone.
Plastic bags.
Stone. We think stone is very permanent, but like a lot of these stone buildings that we have up, the stone is rotting even now. Mm-hmm. It's very rare for stone buildings to last more than a few thousand years.
You're absolutely right, and it's very sad when you travel to a place which has some of the most famous and most beautiful architecture that has ever been built, and you see it crumbling right before your eyes.
That's right. You can go to the Parthenon in Greece and go to Egypt, and you can see that this process is going on. So they said anything made of stone would also be gone. So they said, well, probably the only thing that you would see would be some thin layers of multicolored gravel that you wouldn't even notice unless you were specifically looking for it. Now, but that's just a prelude. Now I will say that there have been some interesting things that have turned up, however, some rare cases where some items do appear to have been preserved. And of course, one of them is gold. There was a very interesting case that I encountered in a newspaper article back from the latter part of the 19th century. It told of a woman in Morrisonville, Illinois, who was putting a piece of coal into her coal-burning stove. It was a rather big piece of coal. It broke open, and inside she found a gold chain about 10 inches long, a very exquisite workmanship. And from this report, we were able to tell what mine that the coal actually came from. So we got in touch with the State Geological Survey of Illinois, and we asked them, well, how old is the coal in this particular place? And they told us 300 million years. Now, that would be before the generally accepted time of the dinosaurs. It would be from before the Jurassic period. It would be from the Carboniferous period. Mm-hmm. So that's really quite extraordinary. Evidence for a human presence, not just stones or bones, but an object of a little bit higher culture. A gold chain from 300 million years ago. Now it's very interesting. In a scientific journal called The Geologist, I encountered a report of an anatomically modern human skeleton that was found also in the state of Illinois in Macoupin County It was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground. Directly above it was a thick layer of slate rock, unbroken. And again, going to the State Geological Survey of Illinois, we asked them, well, how old is the layer of rock 90 feet below the surface of the ground at this particular location? What is the age of the layer of rock below the 2-foot thick layer of slate at this particular area? Now, of course, we didn't tell them what was found there, because sometimes if you tell them what was found, they don't answer your letters.
I bet.
But we just presented the geological evidence, and we asked them, well, how old is this layer of rock down here at the 90-foot level? And they said, again, about 300 million years. So that's a human skeleton the same age as the gold chain.
Now, when you say anatomically correct, are you talking about...
Anatomically modern is the technical phrase that we use, because sometimes if we say human, well, that could mean an ape man or this or that or the other.
If you're talking to Leakey, it could almost mean a chimpanzee.
Right. So we specify anatomically modern. That means the same form as us.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, not an ape man, not a some kind of human ancestor, but a human being like ourselves. The skeleton was described as a skeleton like ours. Now, sometimes when some orthodox scientists hear of a skeleton, an anatomically modern human skeleton being found in some very ancient layer of rock, they immediately say, well, it must have been an intrusive burial. What they mean by intrusive burial is say a few thousand years ago, perhaps an Indian died in the state of Illinois there, and his comrades dug a hole, put the body in it, and therefore, when you find the skeleton a few thousand years later, it's in a very ancient layer of rock, but it doesn't belong there. In other words, it doesn't belong in the layer of rock that's millions of years old. Somebody just dug a hole, buried the skeleton there, covered it over, and when you come upon it years later, you mistakenly think that the skeleton belongs to this very ancient layer of rock.
That's their argument.
That's an argument, but in this case it really doesn't apply, because normally people don't dig holes 90 feet deep to put their skeletons in, and if they had, they would have had to have broken through the thick layer of slate rock that was found directly above the skeleton and was described by the original discoverers as being unbroken. So that kind of objection doesn't appear to apply in a case like this. And getting on to some other discoveries that kind of go beyond just stone tools and the human bones. There was a very interesting report from Scientific American from the year 1852, which told of a beautiful metallic vase with floral inlaid silver patterns on it that was blasted out of solid rock 15 feet below the surface of the ground by workers who were excavating a foundation for a building near Boston. So, all right, so you have this beautiful metallic base coming from 15 feet deep in solid rock. Again, from this report, we were able to go to the United States Geological Survey and ask them, well, how old is the rock at this particular location at that particular depth? And they said, oh, it's a very well-known formation. It's called the Roxbury Conglomerate, and it's from the pre-Cambrian period, and it would be about 600 million years old. So that's evidence there, coming from a scientific journal, a report of a beautiful object being found in layers of rock 600 million years old.
Gee.
And there are just dozens and dozens of such discoveries. There are reports of coal miners at Heavener, Oklahoma, digging. They were in the coal mine about 2 miles down, and they were blasting out cavities, they call them rooms, to get at the coal. And some of the miners reported finding a stone wall 2 miles below the surface of the ground, a stone wall made of polished stone, polished rectangular stones. And they said what happened is when they reported this to their supervisors, they were ordered out of the mine. The mine was filled up and they were sent to another mine quite far away. There are a lot of interesting reports of discoveries that were made in coal mines. And I'm told by sources that these discoveries continue to be made up to the present day. Of course, what often happens with these discoveries is we never hear about them because the coal miners will just take these objects, put it on their mantle over their fireplace, and nobody will hear about it. Eventually they die, and the family members just take it and sell the objects at a rummage sale or something, and we don't get oftentimes get the objects preserved.
You said something that's intriguing, that the coal miners would report their find to their supervisor, and then they would call them all out of the mine and close the mine and fill it up and send them somewhere else. I find this incredible in light of the fact that neither the supervisor nor the mine owners would probably realize the significance, nor would they probably care, especially in light of the fact that they had money down there that they were trying to bring up. Who in the world could have influenced them to fill up a mine and walk away from money?
Well, I think it may have something to do with geologists they may have employed, and it may also be because of through their boards of directors, they may have been in contact with foundations who realize the explosive impact that these discoveries could have on people's worldview, and it may. I think it's the same sort of reason. Well, why would scientists today try to stop NBC from showing a television program about some strange archaeological discoveries? I think they realize that these discoveries, which tell us something about our human origins, who we are and where we came from, could have ultimately a big impact. Yeah, because I think we have to understand that our whole civilization is based on us having a particular concept of who we are and where we came from. For example, the civilization of Europe in the Middle Ages was heavily based on Christian concepts of who we are and where we came from, and you had a whole culture, that was based on all those big, beautiful cathedrals being built. All the artwork that came down from those times was religiously inspired. The whole way of life turned around the sacred calendar of the church. Those were the big events, and most people were involved in all of that. Now today we have an entirely different emphasis in society. If you go to any city in Europe that was there since the Middle Ages, you always see that the biggest building was the cathedral, the church. Today, you go to a city in the United States or Europe that's a more modern city, the biggest building is what? It's always the bank buildings. And the main activity, the main activity that everyone revolves around is consuming products that are made by industries that the same people work in, and people are getting rich off of that. And I think there's a whole. One of the reasons why so many of the very wealthy people in this country like Darwinism is they called it social Darwinism, because it justified the positions that they found themselves in, and I think they want to keep the current social arrangements intact. And if we get another picture of who we are and where we came from, and that ultimately might disturb all these different arrangements that people want to keep intact.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Not just keep intact, but that they've taken great pains to build in order to destroy or attempt to destroy the system that had prevailed before. I think the biggest target, of course, is religion. Not just the Christian religion, but Orthodox Judaism, the Islamic religion, all religions that there are, except the religions that allow man to be God. What do you think about that?
Oh, I do think that there's an agenda like that. I mean, we can see it in this country. As I said, you've got it mandated that you can't teach anything other but a very atheistic, materialistic, Darwinian theory of evolution of the nation's tax-supported schools. And any time that's challenged, you get committees of Nobel Prize-winning scientists getting together to pressure the courts to keep these laws intact. Every once in a while, in one of our southern states or midwestern states, the state legislature will attempt to pass a law saying, well, let's present an alternative in the science classrooms. They don't even call it. They even say, well, we won't even talk about the Bible. We'll just talk about intelligent design. We'll make it non-sectarian. But in every single case, the federal courts have always struck those laws down at the direction of the fundamentalist Darwinists within the scientific community.
Well, so the correct term, I think, the correct term, I think, is Marxist socialists. Charles Darwin certainly was one.
Well, he certainly was very popular among the Marxists and the socialists. Maybe people, they don't attach these labels to themselves, but
because they don't want anybody to know what they're doing.
Yes. So that's probably true. But whatever label you attach to it, I think it is. We're talking about social philosophies. Whatever label you attach to them, you could call them Marxist or whatever, but they are social philosophies that emphasize working hard simply to exploit and dominate matter. They want to keep this separation between church and state, which I think our founding fathers really didn't intend. I think they intended for...
What they intended was to keep the government
illuminated and inspired by godly sentiments. I think they really intended that. I think
from my reading of their writing, what they intended was that there be no state-approved or state religion, and that was only
religion, which they've actually got now. That's what the Darwinists actually have. They've gotten the state to approve
of their religion. You're right.
Exactly the opposite of what the founders intended.
Yeah.
So we've got that's. I think that the federal government's mandate by law that nothing else can be taught in the school systems other than this Darwinian theory of evolution amounts to an establishment of religion.
Yeah, state religion.
And they're funded. The priests of this religion are funded by our tax money. In other words, you've got professors and teachers at schools and colleges who are being given salaries of $50,000 to $100,000 a year to make this propaganda. To say these things. We have to pay for this propaganda, this materialistic, basically atheistic propaganda that's coming from this people. We're being forced to pay our tax money to support these people, and I think that's wrong.
I'm curious, Michael, when you first started this journey, when you were reading the ancient texts and of the different countries and peoples.
That started back in the early 1970s when I was, of course, I'm 50 years old now.
Welcome to the club.
About 24 or 25, starting seriously looking into these matters.
Were you trying to look for some validation for your religious beliefs when you did that?
Well, initially I was just interested in seeing what these writings had to say. Now, I would say yes. I mean, in the introductions to my books, I always mention that I do come from a particular standpoint. I do have some faith in God, and I've gotten that faith, from many sources, but the source that I've been pursuing for the past 25 years or so, I found a lot of inspiration in some of these ancient writings from India. I've always been very much inspired by them, and I visited that country several times, and I'm very inspired by that, and I do admit that that's a source of my ideas and the inspiration behind a lot of the work that I do. Now in my books that I've published thus far, like Forbidden Archaeology, in the text of those books, I really don't get into my ideas, because what I simply have tried to do is, I admit that I had some inspiration to start digging for these facts, but in my books I just put the facts out there, and I'm quite happy to have anybody look at those facts and interpret them as they will. And a lot of people from a lot of different perspectives have made use of the information that I provided. For example, there are Christian creationist scientists who very much like the work that I've done, even though I'm coming at it from a different angle, religiously speaking, and I might disagree with them about the age of the Earth. Many of them prefer a very short age for the Earth, and I don't have a problem with a very long age for the Earth, but they've said, for example, there's the Christian Research Society Quarterly, which is the main scientific publication of the Christian creationist scientists, and they've said, they've written a very nice review of my book, where they say, yes, this should be required reading for anybody who's interested in this subject. And they say, well, we disagree with the author as far as his religious ideas go, but as far as the evidence that he's presented, it goes against the Darwinian theory of evolution, and we find it quite an important book in that respect. And then I've also had Islamic scientists say that they appreciate the evidence because it goes along with some of their ideas, because they say in the Quran there are descriptions of generations of humans existing before Adam and Eve. So they found it interesting. People who are involved in UFO research, who believe that the Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials in ancient times, well, they look at the work and they find it valuable for their purposes. And you go across the intellectual spectrum. So what I find is that people all across the intellectual spectrum are able to look at these facts, and I think they all have to agree on one thing, that however you want to interpret it, these facts do contradict the standard theory of human origins and antiquity that we've got today, and it kind of indicates that we need a new explanation. We do need a new explanation of where we came from and how long we've been on this planet. But aside from providing that information, in the books that I've published so far, I don't put my own interpretation on it, because I want people to be free to look at that evidence and draw their own conclusions. Now, I'm pretty well convinced that if anybody does look at that evidence with an open mind, they're going to draw the conclusion that whatever the real story may be, the story we've been told
is not it.
Is wrong.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to write another book where I put my interpretation on the evidence that I've uncovered, and I'll offer my own alternative explanation. But I do want others to be free, feel free to look at that evidence.
Well, you've certainly enabled us to do that. One of the reasons you're on this broadcast is because of your propensity to accurately document and source your facts, and that gives you tremendous credibility. I remember when I've got to do this. Hold on just a second. You're listening to WBCQ, Monticello, Maine, USA. I can remember when Dr. Leakey found the Lucy.
That would be Dr. Johansson. He would be the one that had found the Lucy skeleton, and ape woman skeleton in Ethiopia in the 1970s. Yeah.
Well, that's absolutely incredible, because Leakey certainly took credit for it. I mean, when I saw the special on TV, it was Leakey holding the bones and it was Leakey talking about the Lucy skeleton and National Geographic.
He may have talked about, because he's one of the great architects of the current theory of human evolution, and he's one of the primary spokespersons for that particular idea. So I wouldn't be surprised, although he wasn't the original discoverer, I'm sure, if it's evidence for his theories, I'm sure he presented on a television program, I'm sure, yeah.
Well, you see, everybody thinks that it was Leakey who found it, because he certainly gives that impression. But when I saw this, and when I saw the actual bones that they found, that they said belonged to Lucy, and that this was the missing link. They claimed it was the missing link that tied the ape man to modern man. And I looked at those bones there, and I'm not an archaeologist, but I'm not stupid either. And what I saw was they had taken a handful of bones that you couldn't even really tell really what they came from, unless, of course, you had studied bones all your life, I guess. And they were forcing us to believe that that's the link between the ape and the modern human being. And I didn't buy it from the word go, because I didn't see that there.
Right, and even within the community of scientists, there are physical anthropologists who have investigated Lucy. And I talk about this in my book. Not only is there evidence showing that human beings like ourselves go back millions and millions of years and completely blow out this whole theory of evolution and missing links in any case, but even if you look at the evidence that they bring out, like Lucy, if you look at it really closely, you'll find that there are scientists who have looked very closely at the Lucy skeleton, and they say, well, what's really happened there is they put together bones from 3 different kinds of animals. Really, they don't belong together at all. And another thing that many of these professional scientists, physical anthropologists, have pointed out is that this Lucy isn't a missing link at all. It's actually very ape-like. The finger bones are very curved, the toe bones are very curved, the shoulder joint points up, indicating that this creature spent a lot of time swinging from branches of trees. The toes are curved like monkey toes. In other words, they want to present, the human evolution advocates want to present the idea that this Lucy was some kind of proto-human being that walked around on 2 legs like us. But really, those who have really looked into the matter say she spent a lot of time swinging from branches like a chimpanzee. And that makes it really hard to see this creature as some kind of human ancestor. It probably was just another kind of ape or monkey.
At one point, Michael, I did an awful lot of research trying to find out if my religious beliefs were correct. And I really gave Darwinism, the theory of evolution, not only a chance, but a good run for its money. And I looked everywhere. I even tried to find absolute proof that evolution was true, because then I wouldn't be confined in this moral cage that I have since discovered is exactly where I should be. But this was in my younger years. And try as I might, and talk to professors, as many as I did, and read books and search through museums, I have never in my entire life found one shred of proof that evolution has any scientific validity whatsoever.
Oh, yes, I think you're entirely right. It's a bluff. In one sense, I've gone to universities. Last year I did a tour of some of the major universities in Europe and countries like Belgium and Hungary. And I was speaking at the departments of archaeology to the students and professors there. And one thing I would tell them was this. I would say, I actually do have some little bit of respect for the original Darwinist, Charles Darwin and his first followers, because they did have some courage to kind of stand up and speak for their idea at a time when nobody else supported it. So you have to give them some credit there. That they had an idea, and they thought they had some evidence for it, and they had the courage to stand up for it when nobody else was really accepting it. And of course, somehow or other, it did become a very popular idea, but after 150 years, they really haven't come up with the goods. They really haven't come up with the proof. And so much evidence has come up, as I've shown, that completely contradicts their idea. I think we do need another idea, but at least we can give them a little bit of credit for having had the courage to actually stand up and say what they believed in and try to prove it. But after 150 years, I don't think they've succeeded. And I think 150 years is a good amount of time to give people a chance. And I think we really have to look for another idea. And I think some of the ideas that, have always been with us in these different wisdom traditions, whether we're talking about the Bible or the Quran or the other sacred books, we may have to give another look at them. And say that, maybe they had it right, that we didn't evolve by chance, by some purely material process of random genetic evolution, but there's some intelligent design and control involved in the whole thing. And that's the ultimate message, I think, of the evidence that I've uncovered, because the evidence for a human presence just goes so far back in time that we really can't explain it by some material process of evolution. There's evidence of the metal base, from 600 million years ago, the gold chain from 300 million years ago. There was a very famous evolutionary anthropologist, Dr. William W. Howells, who was from Harvard University. He read my book. He's one of the main architects of this dominant mainstream theory of human evolution. He's one of the contemporary advocates of this. And he said, after reading my book, he said, if what you say is true, and I'm not admitting that it is, but if it is true, then it calls into question not just even the story of human evolution, but the whole history of life on Earth. He said there's no way that the evidence that you've reported can be accommodated with any conceivable evolutionary process. So I agree with him on that. If you take this evidence for extreme human antiquity seriously, and I think we do have to do that, what it means is we can't explain our presence here on this planet by Darwinian evolution. We have to look towards some other explanation. And I think the very first place to look is the place where we started out from, that there has to be some kind of God behind it all, some kind of creation, some kind of intelligent design and control.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, Michael, I was wondering, I may have missed it earlier, when you first began looking at this, you said you're around 25, 27?
Yeah.
What was your formal educational training? I was curious, I may have missed it.
I grew up in a military family. My father was an Air Force intelligence officer, so when I went to school, I had lived all over the world. Mm-hmm. I'd always been around military folks and other kinds of intelligence people. So I was headed in that same direction. I went to the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., to the School of International Affairs, and I was studying international politics and Russian language and German language, and I was headed in that same direction. Now, during the time I was in school, I became more interested in, I had always been interested in philosophy and things like that, so I became very interested in philosophical and spiritual subjects, and that led me on to a different path. So I'm not a trained archaeologist. That's not my background. I approach this question from an entirely different perspective. I have, however, through the research that I've done, learned how to communicate with these people very effectively, so much so that even though I don't have a PhD in archaeology. I get invitations to speak to archaeology classes at universities around the world, and I've been invited to give a talk at the World Archaeological Congress, which is being held this coming January in Cape Town, South Africa. It's one of the main organizations of archaeologists around the world. And, I'm going to be going there, and I'm going to be talking to them, and I've talked at other scientific conferences as well. So I don't have a degree in archaeology. I'll mention that Richard Leakey doesn't either. That's one reason I like him. I disagree with him. He was a kind of a maverick himself, researcher. He didn't go through the university system, but he made a lot of discoveries that got him a reputation. So I had to put myself in that same category. I'm an independent researcher, and I do feel that it's important to be able to speak and communicate with other scientific audiences, and I have learned how to do that. But I'm not one of them. I think from time to time it really helps to have an outside person come in and look at something, just like in the federal government. They have this, whatever you think of the concept, they do have this idea that sometimes you need an independent counsel, I guess what they call them, independent prosecutor, go in and investigate. Because sometimes you can't trust the people in a particular department of the government to investigate themselves. So I think...
Really?
In the same way, I don't think we can trust these scientists to always investigate themselves. They like to say, well, we're different. We can handle everything ourselves. We've got a self-correcting process here, and we don't need anybody to come in and look and tell us what we're doing. But, I think it's just the nature of the modern world. We've learned to become skeptical. We don't trust everything that the press secretary of a politician, whether it's the president of the United States or a senator or a governor, we don't accept, everything that the press secretary says. We don't accept what the publicity handouts are. We want to ask our own questions. We want to dig a little deeper. We've got this healthy skepticism. It applies to, people in corporate world too. We don't accept every statement that the public relations department of the corporation puts out. We want to ask them questions. We want to keep an open mind. Even religion hasn't escaped this.
Michael, what planet do you live on? you and I might not, but the vast herds of what I call sheeple out there believe anything that they hear.
I'm talking about people like us. But I think even people like us, somehow or other, we've kind of exempted the spokespersons from the scientific community from this. Somehow or other, they've managed to escape a little bit. So I think
in some areas, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, we got to start asking questions. And why can't an outside person? Sometimes people get intimidated. Well, I'm not a scientist. How can I ask these questions?
Yeah.
But we have a jury system in this country.
But whoever would have dreamed that a guy that goes out and digs up old bones would be lying to us? And whoever dreamed that he would have any interest in doing such a thing? When you think about it and you understand the tremendous stakes involved, then you can understand how if powerful socialists came to be totally in charge of the educational system and the process whereby people become funded, because if you're not funded by somebody, you can't exist as a scientist.
Oh, that's right. And boy, we could get into some cases, some specific cases of what happens to scientists who somehow become involved themselves in some of these discoveries.
Why don't we do that?
Oh, well, one case that I just have found very fascinating is the case of Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre, who's a geologist, and she was involved in some discoveries that were made in Mexico back in the 1970s. What you had there is some archaeologists were making some excavations at a place called Hueyatlaco, which is near the town of Puebla in central Mexico. And these archaeologists, they were digging their trenches, and the bottoms of their trenches, they were finding some very exquisite spearheads, nicely carved spearheads and arrowheads and other kinds of stone tools and implements. So, of course, they wanted to know how old they were. So what they do in a case like that is the archaeologists call in the geologists, because the geologists are the experts in earth science. They can tell you, well, how old the layers of sediments in which the objects are found really are. So one of the geologists they called in was Dr. Virginia Steve McIntyre. And she was a young scientist at the time. She'd just become established in her profession. And she had invented a new method of dating, so she achieved a little bit of an international reputation, even though she was just starting out in her field. And she was very, very optimistic and very enthusiastic. And she went down there, and she used 4 different methods. She and her colleagues used 4 different methods, including the new method that she herself had invented to date this particular site. And they found that each of the 4 methods that they used independently gave them an age of about 250,000 years for this particular site. So they went to the head archaeologist, and they told him, Virginia Steve McIntyre told him, well, not him, it was her, it was actually a woman who was also in charge of the site, and said, well, your site is 250,000 years old. So the head archaeologist said, well, I can't accept that. That's impossible, because human beings didn't exist at that time, and I can't report dates like this. It would ruin my career, because, according to the standard ideas, human beings didn't exist until about 100,000 years ago, even in Africa. And so let's speak of North America, at 250,000 years. The standard idea is that no human beings entered North America any earlier than about 25,000 years ago. That's when they say the ancestors of the Native Americans, the American Indians, came over from Siberia, over the Bering Straits. So 250,000 years, impossible. So what happened to Virginia Steve McIntyre? Number 1, she found, of course, she couldn't get that report published. Number 2, she found that in her profession she started to get a very bad reputation, because her colleagues were whispering in the hallways of the scientific conferences, well, she's a troublemaker, she's a maverick, she's a publicity seeker. She found she lost a teaching position that she held at the university in the state of Colorado, and she also found that all her opportunities for advancement in the United States Geological Survey, where she was employed, were suddenly blocked off. She hit the glass ceiling with a vengeance. Finally, she just got so frustrated. She tried to make her case known to her scientific colleagues, but she got completely shut down. And finally, she just got so frustrated with the treatment that she was receiving that she just left her profession. She and her husband moved off to a little town in the mountains of Colorado, outside Denver, and she was just quiet for about 10 years until I found out about her case, and I wrote about it in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and got her a little bit of publicity, and that sort of got her going again. I'm happy to say she kind of woke up, and she's back out there fighting again. But these are the kinds of pressures that can be applied. For every, say, professorship that opens up in an American university, you've got about 400 or 500 applicants. And to get that job, or to get that research money, you have to toe the line.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get involved in some discoveries of some things that shouldn't be found, and ages that shouldn't be reported, then you suffer for it professionally. And the case of Virginia Steve McIntyre is a case in point.
Wow, and we've known this for many years, that scientists are controlled by the purse strings, and also people who go against what has been dictated, that is the status quo of the science, so to speak, don't get tenure.
That's right. Yeah, if you have a black mark against you, sure. As a matter of fact, you won't even get your PhD, because you have to submit your research to a committee. And if they don't like it, you don't even get your PhD. So you learn to play the game right from the very beginning. And it's a very effective way of establishing a cadre of well-trained people who accept a certain set of beliefs, and they want to keep things that way.
You know, in this broadcast, we teach people to question everything, not to believe anyone or anything that they read, but to question and do research and investigate for themselves to find the truth. And a lot of my audience, thank God, take it seriously, and some of them are young people who are just going into college, and I get phone calls from them. And they tell me that they're in such and such a class, and they have such and such a professor, and he's teaching such and such, which they know to be wrong and can prove it's wrong. And they answered the questions on a test truthfully and failed, even though they could go to the professor and prove to the professor that their answers were the true and correct answers, and the answers he wanted them to give were false. And my advice to them is study and learn the truth, answer the questions the way the professor wants, walk out with your little sheepskin, and then go out and tell the world what the truth is. And
yes, I think that's often what you have to do, because as I said, these ideas,
it's the only way to get through college.
Ideas are enforced by the full power of the state.
Yeah.
You can't teach anything else, and you have these this ideological cadre in there that feels that they have the right to indoctrinate their students with these ideas.
Well, that's socialism. Socialism believes that they are to engineer the future using any method that will work, including lies. Karl Marx was clear on that. And if that's...
As I said, the Darwinian ideas were very popular with Karl Marx and Engels and Stalin and Lenin, and also Hitler liked them very much as well.
Yes.
Because I think they can see, yes, if you can eliminate religion, which Darwinian evolution does, and it makes, I guess, the whole goal of those different ideologies was just to focus people on producing a heaven on earth without God.
You've got it. That's exactly what they want. They want to produce what they call the utopian world.
Yes, and I think that's still there. Now, when I lectured at universities, particularly in Europe, the students are usually quite fascinated by this evidence. I can always tell, you can see the professors, they're getting a little antsy because the students are lapping this up because they haven't heard about this evidence. They just find it amazing that there's just so much evidence that's not even mentioned in their textbooks, even negatively. You know what I mean? The process of suppression of this evidence has been so complete that it's not even mentioned even in a negative way. So what I tell these students is, at least you should be aware of all of the facts, the entire data set relevant to your discipline, relevant to your field of study. And whatever you think about the facts, you may think, well, this is good or bad, but at least you should be aware of all the facts. And I'm just confident that when people are aware of all of the facts, that they'll make the right decision.
Well, let's hope so. It's easy for people to pick and choose between truth and lies if they have access to all the data. It's not easy if they don't. If they're given a set of data and they're told that that's all the data that exists, and they're told that
then it seems logical.
Yes, then it seems logical to believe that data. And so many people are deceived in that manner because it's a lie by omission.
That's right. They don't get all the facts.
Yes.
They just do not receive all the facts. And I think that's why. I think that's one reason why what you're doing is very important, because we need different channels to get these facts out to the people, because in a lot of cases you just can't do it through many of the main channels of information that people have. There's too many gatekeepers there who are preventing this information from coming out. It's very hard to get it out through the standard educational system, for example. It's hard to get it out through the mainstream media, particularly from PBS.
Mm-hmm.
They're lock, stock, and barrel sold out to the mainstream Orthodox scientific community. But fortunately, we do live in a diverse world, and there's diverse means of communication. We have what you're doing, which I think is very important, and there's other sources of other ways of communicating the evidence and the facts that people need to make informed decisions. So I congratulate you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Michael. Are there some other pretty important things that pretty important findings that you've made that you think our listening audience might be interested in?
As I say, it's always interesting for me that there's the finds themselves, and then there's what happens to them, which is important. Of course, we were talking about Richard Leakey a little bit earlier in the show. His mother actually made some very interesting discoveries. She, in 1979, in the East African country of Tanzania, found some very interesting footprints. She found dozens of footprints of several different individuals arranged in tracks, dozens of footprints in each set of tracks. The physical anthropologists who look at these footprints tell us that they are anatomically modern, they're indistinguishable from modern human footprints. In other words, they're just like the footprints that you or I or any of your listeners would make if we were walking on a beach. And the unusual thing about them is they're found in solidified volcanic ash. That's about these rock deposits are about 4 million years old, which is really quite extraordinary, considering that the standard idea is that human beings like ourselves didn't come into existence any earlier than about 100,000 or 200,000 years ago at most. So here it is. This evidence is actually staring them right in the face. The footprints are there. Now, how do they explain them? Well, what they say is, there must have been an existence in East Africa 4 million years ago, some kind of ape man that had feet exactly like ours, and that's how those footprints got made. Now, it's a very interesting proposal, but unfortunately, there's not a shred of physical evidence to back up that idea. They just say it. But if you actually look, you find that they already have the skeletons of the ape men that they say existed at that time. We were talking a little earlier in the show about Lucy, who is the most famous specimen of the ape man that's technically known by the name Australopithecus.
Mm-hmm.
That Australopithecus is the ape man that they say existed 4 million years ago in Africa. And they have foot bones from those creatures. And their feet are very different from our feet. For one thing, their toes are about 1.5 times longer, at least 1.5 times longer than the average human toe. The foot structure differs in many other important respects from a modern human foot. So those creatures could not have made the footprints that Mary Leakey found at Lake Tolly, because those footprints, all the anthropologists who study them, say they're indistinguishable in all their measurements from they're indistinguishable from our feet. In other words, they're just like anatomically modern human footprints. So the actual fact is that the only creature actually known to science today that has a foot that could make the footprints that were found by Mary Leakey in East Africa and Tanzania is a human being like ourselves. So that's there. And of course people will say, well, those are footprints. Are there any human skeletons the same age? And yes, there are. During the 1880s, an Italian geologist named Giuseppe Ragazzoni found in northern Italy at a place called Castanedolo skeletons of several individuals, not just one skeleton, but about 3 skeletons of 3 or 4 different individuals that were found in layers of rock, undisturbed layers of rock, about 4 to 5 million years ago. He had considered the objection we were talking about earlier, namely intrusive burial, namely the idea that, well, perhaps somebody had only a few thousand years ago buried these skeletons down in these very ancient layers of rock, and that's how they came to be there. But he was a professional geologist, and I studied his original reports, and he was very aware of this possibility, and he looked very carefully as he was taking these skeletons out, and he determined that all the layers of rock above the skeletons were undisturbed. There was no sign of a burial. So therefore, those skeletons really did belong in those layers of rock that were at least 4 million years old, just as old as the footprints that were found by Mary Leakey in 1979 in Tanzania. Now, the actual oldest piece of evidence that I encountered in the 8 years of research that I did, this took the form of metallic balls, round balls, about 1 to 2 inches in diameter, that were found by miners in South Africa. They're made of a naturally occurring iron ore called hematite. And what's unusual about them is their round shape and the fact that they have around the center, around the equator, grooves. Sometimes 1 groove, sometimes 2 grooves, sometimes 3 parallel grooves. Very mysterious objects. The mineral deposits in which the miners found these round metallic objects with the grooves around them, the mineral deposits in which they are found are about 2 billion years old, and at which time, according to the standard accounts, there shouldn't have been any life at all on Earth.
Really?
Now,
some people say there wouldn't have been an Earth, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so they're very unusual objects, and they're quite extraordinary. Now, pictures of them were shown on this NBC television special, and afterwards some geologists on the internet were saying, well, you can find these objects all over the world. They occur naturally. And so I put up a message. I sent an email out to this discussion group, internet discussion group, where this particular geologist was making these claims. I said, all right, if you say these objects are so common, then why don't you send me a photograph of one from anywhere else?
All right.
And he couldn't do it, so it was all just a bluff. And nobody is. These objects were submitted to some metallurgical analysis before they were shown on the NBC television special, and the metallurgists who examined them said they could find. They identified what they were made out of, hematite, this naturally occurring kind of iron ore, but they said they could find no natural explanation for their round shape, and especially no natural explanation for the grooves that were carved around the centers of these objects. And they weren't carved after they were taken out of the ground. They made that very clear, because they were, when these objects were extracted from the rock, that we had samples of them still half embedded in the rock in which they occurred, and the grooves could plainly be seen on the ones that were solidly embedded in the 2 billion year old rock in which they were found by these miners. Now, it was very interesting. In my book, there's a photograph of one of the best specimens. It's a specimen that has 3 parallel grooves going around it. And this particular specimen had been kept in a Museum of Natural History, the Museum of Natural History in Klerksdorp, South Africa. And the photograph that we reproduced in the book was sent to us by the director of that museum, Rolf Marx. Now, later on, a Dutch television producer saw my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and he decided he wants to go down to South Africa to film that particular object. But I gave him the contact information, but when he got in contact with the museum director, he learned that that particular object had been stolen from the museum. And this often happens with this anomalous evidence. Sometimes it's stolen. it gets stolen from the museums.
Or at least that's what they say. Do you believe that it was really stolen, or that it's...
Yes, I do, because this person had previously been very cooperative. Rolf Marx had been very cooperative, and I don't have any reason to disbelieve his story that it had been stolen from the museum. Now, there was another case of a Canadian anthropologist who had discovered a very interesting skull in Brazil, and he had taken some photographs of it and had written a scientific report about it in one of the standard anthropology journals. But when he went back a couple of years later to the museum where that object had been originally discovered, he found it had also been stolen out of the museum. So this is, I think sometimes this happens to this anomalous evidence. It gets stolen. Or perhaps you're right. Maybe there is something else going on there that I'm not aware of. And that's what I always find so fascinating, is not just the object itself, but the things that happen to it, how this process of knowledge filtration really works.
Yes. Michael, I was wondering, in doing some research on the subject, I noticed something called the Darwin Sunset Tour. Is that the correct?
Well, that was my book was published in Hungarian last year, and as part of the introduction of that book to Hungary, a tour was organized for me to all the major universities in Hungary. I appeared on national television there. I was also on their national radio, and a lot of their magazines and newspapers, caused quite a stir in the country, and the tour was called by the organizers the Darwin Sunset Tour, indicating, well, the sun of Darwinism is setting in this particular country.
Yeah, we know that. we understood exactly what the meaning of that was.
Right. It was very interesting, however, after the tour organizers invited two leading Darwinian scientists in Hungary to have a meeting with me in a restaurant in Budapest. So they came and they met with me. One of them was an older gentleman, and he was practically in tears. He said, I'm a Darwinian, and you're traveling all over the country, and you're getting on national television, you're going to all the universities and speaking. What's going to happen? There's not going to be any Darwinians left. And I said, well, don't worry. There'll probably be a few left over.
There you go.
Oh my goodness!
That was amazing. Everywhere I went, everywhere I went, the auditoriums were packed full, standing room only, sold out, because, of course, that country had been under the communist Marxist domination for so many years, and they were really quite happy to see someone come up and stand up against this Darwinian idea, which had been so much a part of the Marxist domination of their country.
Well, sure, it was the first strike against God.
Sure, absolutely.
And if it's victorious, it means that man then become God, which means that man can do no wrong, which means that everything, instead of being objective, and instead of man having to answer to some higher authority, then everything that man does is okay, and everything becomes subjective, which means we go back to the law of the jungle, and whoever has the biggest gun and the biggest fist rules.
Right. Something a little more interesting, Bill and Doyle, is 2 years ago I went to Moscow. I went to Russia, and I was very surprised that Pravda ran full half-page article about my book Forbidden Archaeology, praising it to the skies. Now, when I started writing that book in 1984, which was the height of the Cold War, the last thing I could imagine in my mind when I was writing this anti-Darwinian book, Forbidden Archaeology, is that I would be speaking to scientists in Moscow, and that Pravda would be writing favorable words about this book and against Darwinism.
Well, for once they lived up to their name. Pravda means truth.
Yeah.
And they had never in their history ever printed any truth. So it was fitting that, at least sometime that they do print some truth.
Well, I think that shows that, well, of course, I think it's a great credit to whatever policies that were followed by the American government, some of the other powers, to get those changes happening there in Russia. But it really was quite amazing. I was able to speak at the Russian Academy of Sciences about this information, and then, even more surprising, when I was in Moscow, some scientists from one of their secret science cities, where they had previously been doing some of their nuclear research, about 200 kilometers outside Moscow, they learned that I was in town, and so they sent a car out for me. They took me out to this science city, and they had about 200 of the top Russian scientists. I gave a 2-hour lecture to them, and they kept me for about 2 hours afterwards, hearing all this information that I've been telling you tonight. And they were very happy to hear it.
That's wonderful.
So, in any case, they seem to be a little more open-minded there than they are in this country, as far as the professional scientists go.
Have you ever actually met Richard Leakey?
I haven't met him, but I had some correspondence with him. He read my book, and then he wrote back. He said it's pure humbug, and nobody should take it seriously but a fool. And actually, I've used that. I actually put that quote on the cover of the book, and it's actually generated quite a bit of, been quite helpful, really, because he really doesn't want to talk about the facts. This is a pretty common reaction among what I call the fundamentalist Darwinists in the scientific community. They don't want to discuss the facts. They simply want to call you every bad name in the book.
That's exactly what they do. That's what they've always done. They will never address the facts. They attack the character of the person. And
I think it reflects pretty poorly on them, and I've been able to use that with some pretty good effect in some of my presentations to scientific audience, because it's really pretty obvious what they're doing, that they're avoiding the issue, and intelligent people, even within the scientific world, can understand and recognize this, and I think they find that kind of behavior abhorrent. When I was in Hungary, getting back to that Darwin sunset tour, I was actually at a university debating one of the leading evolutionary archaeologists in Hungary to a totally packed auditorium at a university in Budapest, students just sitting in the aisles and packed all the way out the doors into the hallways. And this archaeologist was trying to apply those same tactics. So one of the Hungarian scientists in the audience actually stood up and said, "Actually, frankly, I'm embarrassed at you, my Hungarian colleague, because this American, he's coming in here, he's giving facts, he's actually presenting evidence, and all you're doing is, essentially blowing off hot air. Evidence." So I think intelligent people can understand these things. They can understand these tactics and appreciate them for what they are.
Well, it's amazing that for so many years they haven't been able to understand it, because all throughout the history of the scientific push for the theory of evolution, people have challenged it based upon facts and have demanded that they prove their theory, and they have never done it yet. And people have accepted it.
Well, I think we have to attribute that to some very effective lobbying on behalf of these people, because I think somehow or other they've convinced these Darwinists, they've actually done a good job of convincing people who have influence over the governments, the courts, and the economy that their idea is somehow or other going to to be very, very beneficial for the interests of all these different groups.
I don't think they had to do much convincing, really. I think that over the years they have actually succeeded in infiltrating and occupying so many important positions in our government by Marxist, socialists, and Leninists that it doesn't take much convincing. All it does is take finding their comrades sitting in a powerful seat, and that's, I think that's the way it's done.
Well, I think whatever label that you attach to these people, I think they are very inclined towards materialistic and atheistic ideas, and these people have infiltrated the university. So if you're going to law school, if you're going to business school, if you're you're getting any kind of training to take any responsible position in either the economy or the courts or the government, you're exposed to that propaganda.
Yeah. And by the way, Michael, it's their label. It's just politically incorrect to acknowledge their label.
That's right. And I think,
and I'm very politically incorrect.
That's right. And I think, however, but I do think things are changing, and I think I've had my own personal experience when people are presented with the truth, at least some of them, they are affected by it. And I don't mind that it's a struggle. I don't mind that starting from where I am or where we are, we're operating against the odds are apparently against us. I don't mind the struggle. I don't mind coming from behind. I find it a challenge.
Me too.
And I think, as I said, I'm not alone in this. There's a lot of people out there now who are trying to get this message out. Michael Behe, the author of the book Darwin's Black Box, Richard Milton, others. There are all kinds of people out there doing this. I think the media is changing a little bit. I think there's a good chance that if we just keep getting the information out there, eventually it's going to have its effect.
I think you're right. I think there's a great awakening occurring. It started off very, very slow, too slow for my liking, but I feel a momentum building, and I know it's going to be significant. When I first started, I couldn't gather 3 people in the living room, and I would have to travel 1,000 miles to talk to them, and they wouldn't even chip in for my travel expenses. And now I can go to Salt Lake City and fill the Salt Dome. And I find that absolutely incredible. And that's just happened since 1988, which is an incredible...
There is something happening. I think we're in the midst of one of these, if you ask me, one of these changes, these intellectual and social changes, fundamental intellectual and social changes that occur, only every couple of centuries or so. And I think we're in the midst of one of these right now.
Well, I certainly feel it, and I hope you're right. Michael, we've only got about 2 minutes left. Can you talk about your books and tell people where they can purchase them?
Well, there are 3 books out there now. One of them is called Forbidden Archaeology. That's the original unabridged blockbuster that started this whole thing off.
Which I highly recommend.
There is a shorter version of the book, an abridged version called The Hidden History of the Human Race. And then just recently out is a book called Forbidden Archaeology's Impact, which gets into all these reactions, all the things we've been talking about here, the NBC television special, the attempts to suppress it, all that kind of stuff that's in there, which I think people will find fascinating if they've read the first book. And those books are available at bookstore chains. They're available at good independent bookstores. The internet bookstores like Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble have them. I could give readers, listeners, an 800 number if they want to get it directly from the publisher, 1-800-HIDDEN-1, HIDDEN, with a numeral 1 at the end, 1-800-HIDDEN-1. They can also check out my website, www.mcremo, MCREMO, one word, MCREMO.com. The books are available from that as well.
By the way, we visited your website, and I've spent quite a bit of time there. It's very interesting. And I enjoyed it very much.
I like the tour of the museum. We could open doors.
Yes, that was a lot of fun. And very educational, I might add. Michael, just quickly, have you suffered any repercussions because of this?
Well, I have not received any death threats, if that's what you mean. I'm publishing, independently, so I haven't been able to, nobody's been able to put any pressure on me in that way. What I do see, the main sort of thing that I see going on is, in the scientific world, is attempts to either ignore my work or to simply call it bad names and sure,
now keep it
every signal possible that to people who are in that educational system and under their control, and through the media as well, attempts to put that politically incorrect label on me and my work.
Well, I find it fascinating.
That backfires on them. It really backfires on them.
It does. President Clinton called me the most dangerous radio host in America. Rush Limbaugh read the White House memo on the air. It was the greatest compliment I've ever received in my life. And it almost overnight, all the shortwave radios in America disappeared from the shelves because people wanted to hear this dangerous radio host.
That's right.
And the only danger that we present is we tell the truth.
Backfires on them.
Yeah.
Definitely does.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being our guest, and I really, really enjoyed hearing all of the things that you've been telling us, and I hope everybody runs out and gets your book and just dives
thank
into
you,
it.
Bill and Doyle. It was really a pleasure being on the air with you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
And for all of our loyal listeners around the world, good night, and God bless each and every single one of you. You've been listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Be sure and tune in again tomorrow night at the same time on WBCQ, The Planet. You're listening to 101.1 FM Eager.